when we're faced with this question of, do I sacrifice those personal values for the greater good? The answer each and every time should be no. And if those engineers at Volkswagen had said that to themselves, that company would not have found itself in the deep and sustained shit that they find themselves in still today. I looked at him, I said, Arnold, the company has hired me for my leadership skills, my cognitive ability, these other things, but they didn't hire and they do not get my soul, period.
Welcome to We Need to Talk, where we try to figure out how to find fulfillment in life and reduce dissatisfaction. Listen to this full episode if you'd like to hear how a deep sense of self-worth can protect your integrity in an unhealthy working environment. We discuss how truthful speech and honesty is the foundation of a healthy society, and we conclude our talk by discussing how our guest, Rob, was able to nurture his authenticity and how he used to do headstands in his lectures, which is really awesome. So enjoy the episode and don't forget to subscribe. Let's go.
Rob, you also phrased that this intrinsic sense of self-worth would like protect you in your career. And is that in the sense that if you have that, you would maintain your integrity in situations where a firm or like a situation might require you to like kind of sacrifice personal values for the greater good of the company? So would intrinsic sense of self-worth help for that? And then second question, like, how does one build that?
Well, that second question is hard. Let me start with the first one and maybe we can ramble into the second one. The answer is yes. I think that's right. I think that sense, I think a sense of confidence and self-worth alongside that, or maybe woven into that, right, is this strong commitment to values. I often use the phrase a moral compass, right? So I think that one's moral compass is totally woven into or sits on top of their sense of self and who they are and how they present themselves and how they behave and they carry on. So those things, in a sense, become foundational, right? And look at, if we, and so then when we're faced with this question of, do I sacrifice those personal values for the greater good? The answer each and every time should be no. And if those engineers at Volkswagen had said that to themselves, that company would not have found itself in the deep and sustained shit that they find themselves in still today, right? They knew it was wrong. The middle managers, the software engineers, the senior managers above them, all the way to the top. The guy got indicted, for God's sake, in Braunschweig or wherever, right? So, I mean, they knew it was wrong. And we could look at, at case after case. I teach crisis management, right? In fact, I'm starting Monday morning, right? Doing a course on crisis management at the University of Tübingen, actually not too far from where you are in Zurich, just across the border in Baden-Württemberg. And one of the things that I talk about in there, in terms of best practices in crisis management, is prevent it from happening, right? How do you prevent it from happening? Well, you have a moral compass that says don't do bad shit, right? This stuff is less like, remember, Nick, when I was giving my 10 things talk, and thing number one was, it's not that hard, right? So all of a sudden we come back to thing number one again. It's not that hard, right? But we get into this trick bag, right? And people and again, it's that slow descent, right? It's that death by 1,000 cuts. Somebody that comes into a company with a strong moral compass and says, I'm not going to do that. And then all of a sudden they erode a little bit and then it's easier. And they erode a little bit more and it's easier. And they erode a little bit more and it's easier. And it's erode a little bit more and it's easier. And those kinds of things, not to get too cosmic about these kinds of things, but that was exactly the formula for the downfall of Germany in the 1930s and 40s, right? It was that little one got talked into that little one, got talked into that little one. And we are in the process, let's hope mercifully that we reverse this. But for the past 4 years in the United States, we have been in that same process with the Trump administration. Little erosion, little erosion, little erosion, little erosion, okay? Now we have a long way to go before we became the Third Reich, but the same principle is there. And that same principle is in effect in our work life as well in the company. And the strong advice that I can offer to people is that if you feel like you're being compromised, it's time to, what did we say earlier? Vote with your feet and just say, auf Wiedersehen, auf Wiederliege, I'm out of here. I can't do this. And, here's the beauty, you guys. This is the beauty for a lot of people is that you guys have education and marketable skills and you can get another job. So, it's not like you're gonna leave your job and you're gonna all of a sudden you're gonna be homeless. No, you're gonna leave your job, you'll get another job. But when you go get that other job, try to find a company that doesn't behave like a bunch of dirtballs, right?
And uh, just to get onto basically Nick's second question on how do you sort of build that sense of deep internal self-value that sort of stabilizes you and prevents you from, let's say, tripping for something unethical or
I wish I knew. I really do. I mean, that's a really hard question. I think to a certain degree, it really has to do with a lot of one's frankly, a lot of one's early life, right? And the way that people are raised, because if you grew up, to be a little bit fun and provocative, I mean, if you grew up in the Trump household, you probably wouldn't have a moral compass, right? Because you'd be seeing cues, in the same way that you see cues in if you see cues from your mother and father that suggest that it's okay to behave contrary to the things that you were taught in school or whatever, those kinds of universal values. I think that, at the risk of sounding, at the risk of being a little bit controversial, I think that one of the values of faith systems, of religions, is that every one of them have this moral foundation, right? Every faith system in the world believes in what we call the golden rule, right? To treat other people the way you would wish to be treated. But every faith system also talks about, nominally about honesty and integrity and those kinds of things. And I'm not, make sure you understand. I mean, I happen to admire people who have that as background. Now, unfortunately, faith systems get horribly perverted in the modern world, right? And what happens? Hypocrisy, once again, the worst sin of all, hypocrisy comes in. And, whether it's fundamentalist Christians in the United States or it's terrorists in Islamic countries. I mean, all of a sudden, faith has gotten perverted for political ends or these ends that none of the people that were around creating the faith in the first place, whether it was Jesus Christ or Allah, whoever, would have been happy about. I'm a little too much digression there. But I think there are these foundations. I do think there are foundations where, we know, and at the end of the day, even if those foundations don't exist in every advanced society, right? And certainly in all across Europe and across much of the world, there are laws, right? At the end of the day, there are laws that require people to be honest. And if you break the laws and you are dishonest or you behave in a bad way, there are legal sanctions, right? That, of course, clever lawyers can get you around, but at least the laws are nominally there again as a foundation for bad behavior.
Yeah, the lawyers will get you through, but they won't get you through yourself. Essentially, you're still,
Right.
what
I
you
mean,
did.
right. Exactly. And again, I think that comes back to, a sense, a willingness to be reflective, and a willingness to for people to look in the mirror, every single day, in a figurative sense, and ask themselves each morning, am I going to behave well today? Am I going to, be a good person or not a good person, right? With good being defined in various ways. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have an idea why truthful speaking and honesty, like why is it actually so important? Because people like to say, be honest, be truthful, don't lie, and you kind of get the gist why. But what's the fundamental reason why? Do you have an idea?
Well, yeah. I mean, the fundamental reason why is that peaceful society, civil society, let's call it that, civil society breaks down. Civil society breaks down if those fundamental values are ignored by significant parts of the population, right? I mean, they just do. That's a fact, and you could look at any number of examples to see that happening, both on a, at the level as small as a local community and a level as large as an entire nation state. So I think it. I mean, because it does matter, and that's why that's why. I'm sorry to bring it back to the larger context, but that's why these gradual descents that, for example, have been undertaken in my country by the Trump administration are so insidious, because falsehood falsehood morphs into the possibility of truth and then becomes truth itself. Or as Vladimir Ilyich Lenin said, if you repeat a lie enough times, people will believe it, right? And so you get those such kinds of situations. So we can't have that. I mean, everybody agrees we can't have that, right? And everybody nods their head and says we can't have that, at the same time that they're behaving in a dishonest or disingenuous way, in a hypocritical way, if you will. They say honesty and then they behave like a dirtball. Ugh.
Mhm. Yeah, I. Mm. So we're basically, yeah. So you're saying if you lie, you kind of corrupt your ability to interpret the world accurately. That's sort of.
Yeah, and what happens is it becomes that descent. It becomes that
Mm,
that downward slope, so that by the time you really get to the bottom, you have no idea, you have no ability at all to sort of discern right from wrong. Ends justify the means, and blah 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 blah, and off we go. And you're really in a bad way then. And if enough people are down in that dirty and awful cellar, then civil society begins to break down, and that's a
that
bad place to be.
that's actually terrifying.
It is terrifying. Of course it is. Right. Of course it
If
is.
if you don't know what's real and what is not anymore, that is not where
Right.
you want to be.
Correct.
Hmm.
Correct. Yeah.
And why do you think? I mean, I'm not, let's say, proficient in, or too proficient in the sort of doings of Donald Trump. I just know,
You don't want to be. You don't
yeah.
want to be. Right.
But I know, like I've heard he lies, and
Oh,
what?
incessantly,
Yeah,
incessantly. I mean, and I mean, and sort of, if I can just, I don't want to have this descend into a, into that world, because really
sure.
we need to move on. But I think that, I mean, kind of tying back to some of these things that we've been talking about, these sort of universal values, and I mentioned a moment ago that the ultimate, in civil society, the ultimate backstop is law. And he has complete disregard for this concept of rule of law. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't believe it. He does, if it suits him, then law is good. If it doesn't suit him, we'll just throw it out. And that's, you can't function in a world like that. You certainly can't lead a country that way, right?
Mm.
And
Ah,
so that's where we are. And I think that same, that same sort of, contradiction, if you will, exists in the world of business, as well as as well as the public sector. So anyway, enough of that.
hmm. Yeah, I know from history, and I heard someone talk about it. As soon as the head of state places themselves above the law, then the system decays.
Yeah,
The all humans
yeah.
are always subjected to the law, never above it, something like that.
Oh,
Um,
exactly. And I mean, this is not a new concept.
mm,
In the year 1215, um, and the Magna Carta was signed, right? And King, who was it that signed it? King John, I guess it was one of the Johns, signed. By the way, I always find it interesting as an airline person that the place where they signed the Magna Carta, Runnymede, is actually only a few miles west of Heathrow Airport. But I digress. They signed this, and that was exactly the concept, that he was not the king acknowledged in the Magna Carta, that he was not above the law. The Magna Carta, in the simplest form, says that everyone is subject. Everyone, including the king, is subject to a consistent application of law. And that idea, which then was built out through centuries in Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence and civil society, and became such a good idea that it was then exported to many other countries, to all over the rest of much of the rest of the world, in varying degrees of success, but certainly into the Federal Republic of Germany as a simple example. Here, I'm going to hang on a second. I'm just going to disappear here while this is on my mind.
Sure.
The Constitution of the Federal Republic of Germany, Basic Law, Grundgesetz. I love this document, right? So these things are foundational, right? And anyway, a little digression.
Well, first I want to lighten up the sphere a bit, because we checked out the YouTube channel you have, and there's one really interesting video about you doing a handstand. So if you can explain what exactly happened there.
Okay, so I have to. So I'll give you a little background. This is kind of a fun story. So first of all, I have to correct you in terms of gymnastics. It's actually a headstand.
A handstand,
A handstand is where you can do it on two, and that requires much more balance than I ever had. If you do a headstand, it's a triangle, and so your two hands and your head, and obviously a triangle is pretty stable, right? But so a little bit of so I could never do it. So headstands. What's the deal with the headstands? Okay, I don't know when the first headstand got done, but it kind of goes back a little bit. It kind of goes back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, and having enough sort of a belief in yourself and who you are, and your self-worth and your self-confidence, to be able to present yourself authentically, right? And my authentic self is, I like to have fun. I like to tell jokes and stories and smile at people and blah, 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 blah. So somewhere along the line, actually it was before that little incident about what to do when the AV failed. Somewhere along the line, I made a presentation to a group of people at American Airlines. And I just, at the end, I thought, I think I'm going to do something fun. So I did my first headstand. And people loved it. They were like cheering. They were like, because the culture at the company was pretty, it was pretty tamped down. It was pretty, we often say button down, like this collar, right? It was a little bit uptight, to be honest. And so here's this guy, right, who's doing a headstand in this uptight culture. And it's like, what is the deal with this guy? And, they clapped and they loved it. And it became kind of my sort of signature move that I did for years and years and years. And I'll tell you one quick story about this that kind of comes back around to my mentor. So I was in London. This is the mid 1990s, must have been 1995, might have even been 1996. And I was the head of international affairs, and I was over in London giving a talk. There was a big sales meeting of all of American Airlines salespeople from all over Europe, right? And, we're meeting in this dreadful airport hotel right next to the runways at Heathrow. And I was giving some kind of presentation on, airline alliances, I think was the topic, and I'm going through this whole thing. And I get to the end, and I did a headstand, right? And people over in Europe, they'd never seen the headstand before because it was only over in the United States, right? So I've now exported the headstand to Europe, and they went wild. I mean, they loved it, and it was like people are laughing. It's like, God, this guy, because of course these people from Europe, anytime somebody came over from the corporate headquarters, they were so uptight, right? They were so blah 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 blah, and it's like, who is this guy? Is this guy nuts? So what happened? So I fly back to the corporate headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas. And a couple of days later, my mentor, Arnold, who I'm now working for, is not only my mentor, but he's my boss, calls me into his office and he said, Rob, I heard about your behavior at the meeting. I said, what do you mean? He said, did you do some kind of gymnastic stunt at the end? I said, yes. And he said, that's, something like, that's not a good thing, or that's bad for your career, or whatever. And, and this comes back around to what we talked about earlier. I said to him, I looked at him, I said, Arnold, the company has hired me for my leadership skills, my cognitive ability, these other things, but they didn't hire and they do not get my soul, period. And he was like, Rob, I don't know. I said, that's it. That's the way I'm me. I'm true to myself. They don't get my soul. They don't get who I am. They're not buying that, right? And, that was 1995. And I went on to get, 3 or 4 more promotions after that. So it didn't seem to wreck my career. Off we go. People are so afraid of these things. So that's the deal. So I'm glad because, in a sense, the headstand thing can, bring us back to where we were and talking about things from before. Yeah.
Wow. That's a pretty strong, I mean, it's a funny story, but it's a strong ending with your sort of, you held your ground and it paid off. Even, ooh, that's a nice dynamic. You held your ground also to the person who gave you, who lifted you up. You had to even stand ground to him. That's,
yeah, the person that I respected most in my long career. And I just said to him, look, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to stay who I am. This is who I am.
wow.
Yeah.
I love that. That is amazing. Yeah.
By the way, cool. I had to give them up. I'm still known for this. And so occasionally, somebody, in fact, this is really fun. This is cute. So I'm doing, in my consulting job, I have a client, and we've been actually having, I can't remember how this came about, but I was having a conversation about a month ago with somebody back at American about something, and she and I hadn't talked to her for many years, and she said, "Are you still doing handstands?" And of course, then I had to correct her. I said, "No, Robin, they were headstands." And I said to her, I said, no, I said, I had to give them up. I did. This is a true story. I had to give up the headstands about a decade ago. I haven't done a headstand for about a decade because the last time I did one, for some reason, I was sort of a little bit, it was a decade ago, I was like 58 years old. And I was a little bit woozy afterwards, like for about a day. And I thought, all this blood rushing into my brain, so I said, I think I better take care of my head. No more headstands, but I'll, continue. I can continue to entertain people, in many other ways, but maybe just not with the blood rushing into my cerebrum.
That's
anyway.
The safe, setting priorities, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Being reflective.
I want to live on for a few more years. I want to stay vertical, as we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Awesome. We covered a lot of ground. That was actually really, really awesome, Rob and Nick. I'm gonna have to rewatch that whole episode because there was a lot in there. Is there anything? I think we can wrap it up now, actually. And
sure.
Rob, you asked if we could do another episode, if you want, if like one could talk again. I'd love to talk again to hear more about your advice, because there's a lot more questions that jump to my mind and that we still wanted to ask you, but I can
perfectly. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Absolutely. I mean, I like doing this kind of stuff. I mean, one of the things that I came to understand when I started going back into the classroom and doing these guest lectures, one of the things that I came to understand early on was, in addition to, the guest lectures at the beginning, going back more than 30 years ago, into the late 1980s, when I first started going into the business room classroom, there was all about airline management, how do airlines work, and yada, yada, yada. But then, along the way, I started to understand that maybe in addition to, giving them a dose of understanding of an industry and some complexity and a feel for the nuance and all this kind of thing, maybe I could also share some, career advice and some life advice with people. And really, that's how some of these other things started to evolve. And, so, I love doing both things. I love to explain how the business works, but at the same time, if I can be of value to people in terms of sharing some advice about career, look, I'm not asking them to imitate me. And if when I talk to them about advice, if they say that's complete crap, they're welcome to have that view. My best value is at least to get people thinking. That's the best thing I can do, to trigger their curiosity.
Yes. I think that's super, it's of very high utility because the individual has the capacity to think critically and be curious. It just needs to be triggered sometimes.
Yep.
So excellent. Cool. Are there any last few words, Nick or Rob, that you'd like to share before we end?
I'm personally just really grateful for this opportunity. It's been a lot of fun and took some notes, so gonna revise that.
Super. That's great. Thanks. And Nick, so Henry and Nick, look, I really enjoyed being with you guys. This is great fun. It's in many respects, this is, the highest and best use of my time. And if I can, again, add value in some way, even just a little bit of value, even just getting people to think a little bit, it's worthwhile. So I'm at your service always. Feel free to reach out to me again, but thanks for the opportunity. Enjoyed being with you.
Rob, thanks a lot. It's actually funny you say that because the purpose of my channel was partially also to transfer the wisdom of older generations to the young ones. So I think with your sharing your knowledge, it's like the essence of that. So awesome. Thank you, everybody.
All right, guys.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode. And I think we'll definitely talk to Rob again. So thank you for listening.